Welcome to the History of Things. If you love discovering the fascinating stories behind everyday objects, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Beer. It's the drink of celebration, relaxation, and community. But did you know this golden brew is nearly as old as civilization itself? From ancient Sumerians to modern craft brewers, beer has shaped economies, cultures, and even religion. Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating history of beer, humanity's oldest and most beloved drink. Let's start at the beginning. Grains, water, and time. The three simple ingredients that changed history. This is the story of how humans learned to brew. We begin in Mesopotamia, over 7,000 years ago. Our story begins not in a bustling city or a modern brewery, but in the quiet dawn of civilization itself, over 7,000 years ago. This is Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. Here, in the Fertile Crescent, cradled by the Tigris and Euphrates, humanity took its first monumental steps away from a nomadic existence. Early settlements flourished along these life-giving waters as people learned to cultivate the land. This agricultural revolution would change the course of human history, and at its very heart was a humble yet powerful grain. That grain was barley. Hardy and nutritious, it became a cornerstone of the Neolithic diet, baked into bread and cooked into porridge. But barley held a secret, a potential for transformation that was likely discovered entirely by accident. Picture this: a forgotten container of grain mash, or perhaps a piece of bread, left out in the open and soaked by rain. Wild, airborne yeasts, invisible to the naked eye, would have found this sugary mixture and begun to feast. The result would have been magical, almost divine. The mixture would bubble and froth, releasing a curious, sweet aroma. The first person brave enough to taste this strange concoction would have experienced something entirely new, a thick, nourishing liquid with a pleasant, warming effect. This was not a deliberate invention, it was a gift from nature. The first beer had been born. The Sumerians, one of the world's first great civilizations, didn't just drink this new beverage, they revered it. They saw its creation as a divine process, and so they gave it a divine patron, the goddess Ninkasi. She was the celestial brewer, born of sparkling fresh water, whose purpose was to sate the heart and satisfy the liver. Her worship was so central to their culture that one of the world's oldest surviving pieces of writing is not a king's decree or a tale of war, but a recipe for beer, beautifully disguised as a poem. The hymn to Ninkasi, inscribed on clay tablets nearly 4,000 years ago, is both a prayer and a practical guide. It poetically describes the steps: the spreading of cooked grain, the malting, the making of bapir, a twice-baked barley bread used to store the grain and add sweetness, and the final fermentation in a large vessel. It was a sacred ritual, transforming humble ingredients into a drink fit for gods and mortals alike. But beer was far more than a religious sacrament. In a world without modern sanitation, it was a cornerstone of public health. The process of boiling the water for the mash, combined with the alcohol produced during fermentation, killed dangerous pathogens. This made beer a much safer alternative to potentially contaminated river water. It was also profoundly nutritious. Early Sumerian beer was thick and unfiltered, more like a thin porridge or gruel. It was so full of suspended grains and yeast that it was often called liquid bread, providing essential calories, B vitamins, and minerals. This liquid sustenance became so vital that it was integrated into the very fabric of the economy. In Sumer and later in Babylon, workers were often paid their wages in beer. Clay tablets record daily rations for laborers, with a standard worker receiving about a liter a day. It was a currency you could drink, a source of energy that fueled the construction of the first cities and ziggurats. Taverns became central hubs of community life, where stories were shared, business was conducted, and social bonds were forged over a shared clay cup. This profound integration of brewing into religion, health, and economy set a powerful precedent. The techniques pioneered in Mesopotamia didn't remain confined to the Fertile Crescent. As trade routes expanded and empires connected, this vital knowledge was carried across deserts and seas. It traveled with caravans to Anatolia, with traders to the Indus Valley, and most significantly, it flowed down the trade arteries into the burgeoning kingdom of Egypt. The Egyptians, with their own deep reverence for agriculture and the afterlife, would embrace beer with unparalleled enthusiasm. They would refine the process, scale up production to an industrial level, and make beer an inseparable part of their journey through life, and even into death. While Mesopotamia may have been the cradle of beer, it was in the land of the pharaohs that brewing would truly become an art form and an industry, shaping a civilization for over 3,000 years. Egyptians brewed beer for everyone, from pharaohs to peasants. Workers building the pyramids were rationed beer, sometimes up to 4 liters a day. Beer kept workers nourished and productive. The Greeks preferred wine, but beer persisted among common people. Romans likewise favored wine in elite circles, while beer remained a staple for many. As farming and trade spread, so did brewing practices. By the end of antiquity, beer was rooted across Europe. Taverns would become social hubs for towns and travelers, and a key innovation was on the horizon: hops. Hops would soon change brewing forever. In medieval Europe, as society reformed after the fall of Rome, it was the monks who became the masters of brewing, turning their monasteries into bustling hubs of production. This wasn't just a pastime, it was a necessity. In an age where water was often dangerously contaminated, beer provided safe, nourishing hydration. It was known as liquid bread, a vital source of calories and nutrients, especially during the long, arduous fasts of Lent. The rule of Saint Benedict, which guided monastic life, called for self-sufficiency and hospitality. Brewing beer fulfilled both duties, providing for the brothers within the walls and for the weary pilgrims they were obligated to welcome. As centers of learning, monasteries were uniquely equipped for this task. Unlike most of the population, monks were literate. They meticulously documented their processes, recording grain bills, water sources, and fermentation times in detailed ledgers. This methodical approach allowed them to experiment with different techniques, gradually refining their recipes and achieving a level of quality and consistency previously unknown. Each batch was a lesson, each record a page in an ever-growing textbook on the art of brewing. But the single greatest innovation of the era was the widespread adoption of hops. Before this, beer was flavored with a proprietary blend of herbs and spices called gruit. The rights to this gruit were often controlled by local rulers or the church, creating a taxable monopoly. Hops shattered this system. As early as the 12th century, the abbess Hildegard of Bingen noted that hops, when added to a beverage, would stop it from putrefying and allow it to last much longer. This was the key. The antibacterial properties of hops acted as a natural preservative, dramatically extending the life of beer. It also provided a pleasant bitterness that balanced the sweetness of the malt, creating the flavor profile we recognize today. With more stable and transportable beer, its role in society deepened. It flowed out from the monasteries and into the heart of every town and village, the tavern. These establishments became the pulsating centers of daily life. More than just a place to drink, the tavern was the community's living room, post office, and news bureau all in one. It was here that travelers shared stories from distant lands, merchants negotiated prices, and local gossip was exchanged over frothing mugs of ale. The tavern was the essential social glue. It was a neutral ground where different classes could mingle, from the farmer celebrating a good harvest to the craftsman sealing a contract with a handshake. Political ideas were debated, alliances were forged, and sometimes revolutions were quietly planned in smoky back rooms. Life's milestones, births, weddings, and funerals were all marked with the raising of a glass. Beer wasn't just a beverage, it was the lubricant for the entire social machine. As the craft spread, so did innovation. The power of water and wind was harnessed to mill grain more efficiently. And while the science of microbiology was centuries away, brewers learned to control fermentation by harvesting the yeast from the top of a successful batch to pitch into the next. This growing mastery, combined with unique local conditions, gave rise to distinct regional styles. The mineral-rich water of a particular valley, the type of grain that grew best in the local soil, or a closely guarded family yeast strain all contributed to a beer's unique character. In the cold cellars of Bavaria, brewers were unknowingly cultivating the yeast strains that would eventually produce crisp, clean lagers, a world away from the fruity ales of England. This flourishing diversity set the stage for a global expansion. The preservative power of hops meant that beer could now survive long sea voyages, making it a vital provision for sailors during the age of exploration. As European ships crossed the oceans, they took their beer and their brewing knowledge with them. Simultaneously, growing cities created a concentrated demand that the small household or monastic brewer couldn't meet. This spurred the rise of the first large-scale commercial breweries. The craft was becoming an industry. These early breweries, born from medieval tradition but poised on the brink of an industrial leap forward, began to establish names for themselves. They were the ancestors of the brands that would one day become household names around the world, riding a wave of commerce and technology into a new era of beer. As the age of discovery dawned, Europeans sailed with beer. On long, perilous voyages, water in casks would quickly spoil. Beer, however, was boiled during brewing, making it a safer source of hydration and vital calories. It wasn't just a drink, it was a provision essential for survival at sea. This necessity was deeply ingrained in colonial America. The Pilgrims aboard the Mayflower famously altered their course due to dwindling beer supplies, landing at Plymouth Rock because their victuals being much spent, especially our beer. Early settlements quickly established their own breweries, with figures like George Washington becoming avid brewers, cementing beer's place in the New World's culture. Then the Industrial Revolution transformed brewing from a craft into a science-driven industry. Steam power replaced manual labor, allowing for massive production. But it was the mastery of temperature and microbiology that truly changed everything. Artificial refrigeration liberated brewers from the seasons, enabling year-round production and the global rise of cool fermented lagers. Meanwhile, Louis Pasteur's discovery of pasteurization stabilized beer, preventing spoilage and allowing it to be shipped across continents. Combined with tools like the thermometer and hydrometer, brewers could now guarantee a consistent product batch after batch. This scientific precision was the key that unlocked the mass market. Iconic names like Guinness, Pabst, and Anheuser-Busch emerged, leveraging this newfound consistency. They built vast distribution networks, using the expanding railway system to move beer farther and faster than ever before, creating national powerhouses. To capture this new audience, modern marketing was born. Vibrant posters and branded merchandise turned breweries into global businesses. The local saloon, often tied to a specific brewery, became a cornerstone of social life where beer was shared across all classes. But the 20th century brought an existential threat: prohibition in the United States. The 18th Amendment was a cataclysm for the industry. Thousands of breweries were forced to close, their kettles falling silent. An entire ecosystem of craft and tradition was nearly wiped out. A resilient few survived by making near beer or malt syrup. When beer finally returned, the landscape was forever changed. The industry consolidated around a few giants producing light, homogeneous lagers. The rich diversity was lost, but the stage was set for a future craft-fueled renaissance. After Prohibition, the industry rebuilt and mass-market lagers grew dominant. Easy drinking lagers became the default beer for many. But in recent decades, a craft beer revolution exploded worldwide. Small brewers began experimenting with flavors, techniques, and styles. We now have hoppy IPAs, sour ales, barrel-aged stouts, and more. Craft breweries revived local scenes, beer once again tied to community and experimentation. Today's beer scene blends tradition and innovation, and the variety keeps growing, appealing to history buffs and casual drinkers alike. From ancient rituals to modern tap rooms, beer has always been more than just a drink. It's a cultural cornerstone. It's a story of human innovation, survival, and community. The next time you raise a glass, remember, you're not just drinking beer, you're drinking history. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey, hit that like button and subscribe. Cheers!